Vladimir Putin still begged Donald Trump for a ceasefire on May 9th. After the conversation between Trump and Putin, Russia officially announced a ceasefire in the war with Ukraine for the duration of the victory parade in Moscow on May 9th, although Kyiv has not yet voiced its agreement. Instead, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, called for a long-term ceasefire instead of a temporary truce so that Putin would not simply be afraid, to come out of his bunker onto Red Square. At the same time, Donald Trump himself rudely brushed off Vladimir Putin. Trump stated that the president of the Russian Federation should focus on a peaceful settlement with Ukraine, rather than interfering in the issue of nuclear disarmament with Iran. Like, don't stick your nose where you're not wanted. At the same time, today in Europe, world leaders were urged to come to Kyiv on May 9th, not to Moscow, to visit the bloody occupiers. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave any comment below. I would appreciate it. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. So, today Vladimir Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated that Russia intends to cease fire for Victory Day, regarding Ukraine's agreement or refusal for a temporary truce. Peskov, responding to a question about Ukraine's reaction to the truce proposal, noted that, quote, "In fact, a reaction is not needed for this." Next, I will quote Peskov's words verbatim. "This is the decision of the head of the Russian state and it will be implemented. But of course, everyone would expect some kind of reaction from the Kyiv regime in terms of reasonable intentions. So far, there is none." Let me remind you right away that the day before, Vladimir Putin called Trump and tearfully complained that Ukraine was attacking the oil infrastructure of the aggressor country. He's even too scared to hold the victory parade in Moscow, saying, "I'm so afraid it's terrible." If you don't believe me, just go to the Kremlin's website. There's a transcript of what his aide Ushakov said after the talks with Trump. And it says directly that Vladimir Putin complained to Donald Trump. He was whining to him and saying, "Damn, the Ukrainians are hurting me. Can you imagine? They're attacking my cities. I started a war against Ukraine and now the Ukrainians are attacking my oil facilities." As a result, Trump said that he offered the Russian leader a brief truce. The Kremlin, for its part, reported that Putin told Trump he was ready to declare a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine on May 9 following the example of the Easter truce. And according to the assistant to the president of the Russian Federation, Yuri Ushakov, Trump supported this initiative. In turn, Zelensky noted that Ukraine stands for a long-term truce, not a ceasefire for a few hours just to hold a parade in Moscow. Here is a quote from Zelensky. "Our proposal is to establish a long-term ceasefire, to guarantee reliable security for people and lasting peace. Ukraine is ready to work for this in any decent and effective format." And here I would like to note that the ceasefire for the occasion of Victory Day on May 9, if an agreement is reached, will already be the third since the beginning of the year. The first one concerned strikes on energy facilities and was announced from January 25 to February 1 by Donald Trump. And after it ended, Trump stated that Putin kept his word and supposedly did not strike Ukrainian energy infrastructure during the severe frosts, although that's not true. Moscow and Kyiv agreed on the second truce during the Easter celebrations, from April 11 until the end of the day on the 12th. Last year, Vladimir Putin also proposed a truce for Victory Day, but Zelensky rejected the offer at that time. And recently it became known that the victory parade in Moscow will be held without a column of military vehicles for the first time since 2007. The Kremlin explained that the decision to cancel part of the parade is due to the terrorist threat from Kyiv. Exactly. And that's what Vladimir Putin was complaining about to Donald Trump like a pathetic boy. Just like some street punk ran to complain and say, "Donny, please do something. Zelensky is hurting me. Ukraine is hurting me." Just such a pathetic loser. So now, formally, the Kremlin is trying to present this as a peace initiative, but behind it is simply the desire to secure Moscow during one of the main propaganda events of the year. And on this occasion, I'll quote the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha. "Why not now? Why wait until May 8th? If Russia really wants peace, it should cease fire immediately. Ukraine is ready to support a complete ceasefire and calls on Russia to declare it immediately, for example, for 30 days and not just for the sake of a parade in Moscow. But let's be realistic. After Ukraine's recent attacks on Tuapse, the Kremlin got so scared that they're even afraid to bring military equipment onto Red Square. Well, first of all, over the years of the war against Ukraine, the Russian army has suffered significant losses in armored vehicles and artillery. Secondly, Moscow is increasingly afraid of Ukrainian long-range drones, which have already repeatedly reached important targets deep in the rear of the Russian Federation. Therefore, this temporary ceasefire could reduce the risk of strikes on the Russian capital. During the victory parade, a symbolic event for the Kremlin. In addition, such a pause would give Russian troops time to regroup, repair equipment, bring in ammunition, and strengthen their positions after exhausting battles. Politically, Vladimir Putin is trying to play the diplomatic game. By proposing this ceasefire specifically through Donald Trump, Putin is trying to present himself as supposedly ready for a truce. If Kiev refuses the short pause, well, Moscow will of course try to portray Ukraine as the side that does not want peace. I'm sure, well, they're already broadcasting this, that we're ready for a truce, but it's Ukraine that doesn't want peace, and Ukraine says, let's agree to a full ceasefire. Why? You're just offering us a ceasefire for one day just so Vladimir Putin's ass is safe and he's not afraid to crawl out onto Red Square. Is it just for that? You're asking us to cease fire so you don't embarrass yourselves on May 9th, that's all. For years, the Kremlin has linked the war against Ukraine to this myth about fighting Nazism, but this year the situation looks less favorable for Moscow. There are no major successes on the front. The military parade on Red Square itself will be scaled down, and Russian cities are now covered in thick black smoke after Ukrainian attacks. And against this backdrop, it's important for Putin not to allow any failures. He needs to ensure the celebrations in Moscow go smoothly and at the same time create the image of a peacemaker negotiating with Washington. But if we go back to the conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, it might seem that Trump is not always and not entirely playing in Putin's favor. For example, right after his conversation with the Russian dictator, Trump stated that the Russian President Putin should focus on a peaceful settlement with Ukraine instead of sticking his nose into the issue of nuclear destruction. Next is a quote from Trump. Putin told me that he would like to take part in removing enriched Iranian uranium if he can help us with that. I replied to him, I would prefer if you participated in ending the war with Ukraine. I would like to note that earlier Moscow had already offered to take control of Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium, which could have been used to create a nuclear bomb. Nevertheless, the phone conversation with Putin was described by the US president as good, and he said that he proposed a brief ceasefire to the Russian leader. And I'll end the segment with a quote from Trump. I think he might agree to that. Putin would like to see a solution for Ukraine, and that's good. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this segment. Subscribe to the channel and like this segment. And friends, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful to you for that. You can do this by making any donation or paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.